our guest. Of course, this is Dr. James Doty, author of Into the Magic Shop. Personally, my one of my favorite books. Dr. James, you became a best-selling author in South Korea in 2018 after BTS, a Korean pop group, released a song, Magic Shop, based on your book. If I may ask, I'm just curious if you knew that or you were also surprised that they have read your book. I just really want to ask, what was your inspiration in writing Into the Magic Shop?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people ask me that, and I had no interest in writing a book. Actually, what happened was in many of the lectures I give, I tell personal stories, and I actually was down in South Africa at Desmond Tutu's birthday party. A guy came up to me and introduced himself. I didn't know anything about the fellow.
Mhm.
Never saw him again during that event, but 3 months later at Stanford, he was in the audience while I was giving a lecture. And at that point, I recognized him and I was going to talk to him, but after the lecture, all these people came up to me and he was gone by the time it finished. Happened another time, same thing basically. And I'm wondering who this fellow is since I met him in Cape Town. And the reason I remember him is he's like 6'7" and a very handsome guy. And so the third time I met him was actually at my house at a party. And this guy showed up, came up to me and he said, listen, I've been following you for 3 years. I love your work. We met in Cape Town. He said, I am very inspired by your stories, as is my
Yeah.
father. And he said, would you consider a book? And he said, the reason I want to do a book is because my father's my hero and I want to share the book with him as a gift. So I said yes without knowing anything about this fellow. And it actually turned out that he's Desmond Tutu's, Mandela's, and Richard Branson's agent.
Wow.
And so actually it was quite wonderful to meet him. He and I became friends, did the book, and there you have it.
I've been reading a lot of feedback and reviews of your book before this interview, and really, what's your reaction when you hear people saying that their lives have changed after reading your book?
Well, first of all, I never thought my book would be of interest outside the United States because to me it was a sort of a very personal story from the
Correct.
States. But it turns out that everyone is suffering in different ways, and that for many people, this brings out the nature of that suffering and their own struggles and actually gives them tools to overcome that. I think the fact that, you know, so many people are looking for something to inspire them, to help them to move forward. And I'm very blessed that my book, for many of those, has been helpful to them.
Personally, one of my key takeaways in the book is that really how heart uh, and brain function together. So when and how did you first discover that meditation and heart play a key role in making best decisions in life?
First of all, I learned it intuitively, not scientifically, when I was 12 years old, as I talk about in my book, when I met this woman who taught me these different techniques. But certainly later on, as I, became a neurosurgeon, a neuroscientist, a physician, I recognized that the vagus nerve, which comes from your brainstem, is very much connected to all the organs in your body, and particularly the heart. And there is this back and forth exchange between the two. If you only function in your head, that may be beneficial for you in some ways in success in society, but it's not particularly helpful in dealing with people or functioning. And I think if you're only into your heart and you don't recognize sort of cautions the brain gives you, you can get lost sometimes. So I think they need to work together for people to function at their best.
Dr. James, you became a best-selling author in South Korea in 2018 after BTS, a Korean pop group, released a song, Magic Shop, based on your book. If I may ask, I'm just curious if you knew that, or you were also surprised that they have read your book.
The goal of writing the book was never necessarily meant to have a bestseller, to sell actually beyond a few. The fact that it ended up selling so well in the United States, became a New York Times bestseller, to me was extraordinary. And I didn't even notice it, except my wife brought the newspaper to me one day. And the only reason I knew about BTS was that, again, someone sent me an email, and I frankly did not even know who or what BTS was. Subsequently, I've learned, of course, and as you well know, they're one of the most popular groups in the world.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is because, how they create their songs is very meaningful and important because, they care about your mental health. They care about how you're doing. They care about, are you looking at the world through the lens of kindness and compassion, which of course is sort of how I see the world. So, it really resonated with me, and I'm actually quite honored that they would do that.
Have you heard the song, Dr. James?
Yes, I've heard it. For me, it doesn't resonate with me, but apparently for a lot of people, it does.
Yeah, yeah. It became one of their most successful songs in their tour, I think, a few years back. So,
Yes.
Dr. James, in the book, of course, not without preempting, because we want others to read more into the magic shop. But in the book, Ruth, the lady in the magic shop, tells us, the importance of opening the heart so the magic sort of flows. How do we know that our hearts have opened already?
I think it can be challenging for a couple of reasons. One is if you're suffering or in pain or have had a difficult background, you create all these protective mechanisms so you don't get hurt anymore.
Mhm.
And as a result, oftentimes you don't pay attention. I think by the techniques that she taught me, which is, learning to relax, to breathe, to be able to focus, and then to be kind to yourself, to not be so critical. That's one of the challenges of people, especially people who are suffering, because oftentimes, and this is especially true of younger people, is they think their situation is because of them, that they did something, that it's their fault, if only they were better, smarter, etc. And it's really not true at all. And those words that come out that you hear are not really truth. They're words that you picked up and have stuck to you because negative things stick to people. And that's the way we're designed as a species, because to survive in the world, when you hear a negative thing, you want to remember it because that protects your life. But unfortunately, it also translates into negative things about you stick to you. One of the things she taught me was that reality, and to change from this perspective of negativity to one of self-affirmation and positivity. And that was very, very helpful for me. It changed everything. And the most important thing it changed was not only, my view of myself, but it changed how I looked at the world. Because if you beat yourself up all the time, you have a tendency to be hypercritical and to beat other people up. So she taught me to look at the world in a different way, to be more kind, more generous to myself and to other people, because what we don't appreciate is oftentimes, because negativity has this tendency to make you just focus on yourself, is that once you start looking outward, you see many, many people who are suffering.
Right.
And when you see that, you end up being, I think, much kinder.
I have a personal curiosity, Dr. James. Have you heard about, or have you connected with Ruth after? Of course, you left your hometown when you were younger.
After about 9 months, I went back to the magic shop. And interestingly, I don't know if you have them in the Philippines. They call them strip malls, but they have these malls that are set up in different parts of a city. And I went back to that area, and the whole place was surrounded by a fence, and all the stores were closed, and they were actually tearing it down to build something else. And so I never saw her again, actually. Now, when I started researching the book, It turns out that she died of breast cancer about 7 years after her and I met.
Dr. James, the word compassion, we always hear this word from you based on your previous presentations and talks. But it is such a very ambiguous word for many, with many meanings. Where do we start the conversation as regards compassion? How do we actually apply it with our daily lives?
Well, first of all, as a scientist, you have to have definition. So the definition of compassion is recognizing another's suffering with a motivational desire to alleviate that suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at how we evolved as a species, because unlike other species, our offspring don't swim away or run off into the forest, they stay with us. And that means we have to teach them. And the nature of that teaching is through something called the mirror neuron system, where they model their behavior off of us, but the other side of it is we respond when they are suffering or in need, and that's crying or showing pain. Mm-hmm. And the thing about that is, if you think about the 15 years or so that's required to raise someone, it takes an immense amount of resources, energy, time. Well, how do you get rewarded for that? You get rewarded when you care for another, because you have the release of these hormones that actually make you feel good, like oxytocin is one, right? So when you care for another, and certainly it starts with your offspring, but even people you know, etc., when you care for another, you actually feel good about yourself.
Another question that I saw online is that, as the Magic Shop book became a series of some sort, what are your plans after that? Can you give us a teaser? Will we expect another book from Dr. James? Wow.
So there's a book that is about 80% done. It's called Out of the Magic Shop, The Power of Intention. And this is the idea of how do you take, which in some ways I talked a little bit about, how do you make things manifest for yourself? And how does the brain do that? And what limits you and what you can do to increases the chance of that. So that's the next book. There's a movie that's probably going to be made here fairly soon about the book.
Finally, my final question would be something relevant with what's happening right now. What is your advice to young people like me, especially amid this pandemic, when, life itself is really difficult and it becomes extra difficult?
Well, I think it's obviously very, very hard for so many people, especially the people who've lost jobs, are confined in small spaces, especially with children who, are suffering because they may not even have a home. They've been evicted or something. I think all of that's horribly difficult. And I think what this reminds us of is the fact that none of us are immune to bad things happening. That's just the way it is. And I think it's important that each of us looks out, and when they see someone suffering, that they reach out and they try to help. Because the reality is that could happen to you. And, obviously there are a lot of rich people around and they feel that they're protected from everything. But as you can even see from this, they're not. If they, especially, but everyone tries to be kinder, gentler, and be helpful, I think that's important. The other challenge is, the nature of not connecting with others, especially, if you live by yourself. And this is an issue, if you will, of, the idea of loneliness.
Yeah.
And I think a lot can be done with that. You can just call someone arbitrarily, even a wrong number, and just chat with someone.
Or like Zoom calls like this.
Exactly. Anything you can do, to connect with another person and to be kind. And I think the nature of being kind is the solution to isolation, loneliness, depression, for all of us.
Thank you, Dr. James Doty. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for gracing Joseph After 8.
Well, listen, it's a pleasure. I wish you the best of luck.
Guys, follow Dr. James on Twitter.
Okay. Well, listen, you take care.
Thank you, Dr. James.